Thina sizwe,
Women's struggle have come a long way since the 1956 march, where thousands of women marched to the Union Building in Pretoria to petition against past laws. During this period, Black South Africans were required to carry a pass which was used to maintain population segregation, to control urbanization and manage migrant labor during the apartheid era. Led by the strike icon Umama Lillian Ngoyi, no Mama Helen Joseph, these selfless women chanted the way, and they were having their own theme, saying, Watinda bafazi, watinda imbogode, uzawukufa, which means when you strike the women, you strike a rock. Women of today face different struggles of inequalities, patriarchy, and gender-based violence, to name a few. The scales are still not balanced. Promotion of gender equality and women empowerment need to be central in order to combat poverty and stimulate sustainable development. A lot of progress has been made thanks to the sacrifice of the brave women of 1956. We fought to ensure that future generations do not go through some of the struggles they have. I want to conclude by words of the prominent activist and the writer, Ufatima Mie, who said, they fought because they did not want to carry a pass. I carry my pass every day in my heart because as a woman, I can't walk freely on the street. We can't claim our freedom as the women in this country, and so we must continue the fight, close quote. I call all of us as women to stand together and fight, because if we are united, we will conquer all our battles. I thank you.
Across the 20th century, women in what is today the province of KwaZulu-Natal organized and fought for the rights of not only women, but all Black, Indian, and colored South Africans. They mobilized in formal organizations such as the Daughters of Africa or the Industrial and Commercial Workers Union. They mobilized as women in groups such as the Federation of South African Women or the Natal Organization of Women, and alongside men in the African National Congress, Pan-African Congress, South African Communist Party, Umkhonto weSizwe, Black Consciousness Movement, and the United Democratic Front. They fought inequality as women, as workers, as intellectuals, as soldiers, and as South Africans. The Women's Revolt at Mkhumbane in 1959. The Durban system of the Native Affairs Department sought to control the movement of Africans to the city through passes. It operated as a heavy yoke on the shoulders of Africans. Those who came from the rural areas found it hard to find permission to enter and stay in the city. Humans were subject to indignities such as physical examinations for disease and a decontamination practice that men compared to being dipped like cattle. Those already in the city struggled to find permits to work or to be vendors. During the first half of the 20th century, Cato Manor was a diverse Durban community where Indians leased plots to Africans. The community lacked adequate housing but grew rapidly. In 1949, tensions erupted in violence between Indians and Africans, after which women were central to organizations such as the Durban and District Women's League that sought to restore relations. Women provided for families by brewing and selling utshwala and shimeyane, though the government sought to curtail this economic activity with a monopoly on beer sales. In 1958, the government declared the region a white area and commenced massive removals of residents to KwaMashu, where many could not afford the rent. Constant police raids on women's beer stalls and shebeens, raids for passes, and the pending forced removal sparked resistance. On realizing that the menfolk were afraid of protesting for fear of losing jobs that enabled them to access the city against the disempowering bylaws, the men rose up. The women commenced a demonstration against the beer halls on 17 June 1959. The following day, about 2,000 women marched into beer halls in Dalton Road and Victoria Street, carrying sticks, and charged the men, warning them against drinking at municipal halls. They destroyed beer and municipal property. The protests spread as people targeted symbols of apartheid's authority. Like Durban, the city of Pietermaritzburg relied on the sale of utshwala to finance segregated services for Africans. This exacerbated economic deprivations of African workers and women's ability to brew and sell. In Sobantu, the urban black township constructed in 1927, residents complained about ongoing overcrowding, a housing shortage, and the attitudes of the white superintendent. They faced threats of forced removals when the Minister of Native Affairs identified it as not in accordance with the Group Areas Act. The municipality announced rent increases in 1956. Other rate increases, such as education levies, followed. A number of educated Africans formed in the late 1940s the Sobantu Residents Association, or Isolomuzi Vigilant Association, to engage the unpopular Bantu Advisory Board. In the early to mid-August 1959, women from across Pietermaritzburg, including Sobantu and its rural surrounds, carried sticks and demonstrated at the police station, the men's hostel, and the Pietermaritzburg beer halls. They marched to the Native Affairs Department with their grievances. In Sobantu on 15 August 1959, both women and men attacked the homes of the two white families of the village superintendent and his assistant. They registered their anger by pelting the two houses with stones and attacked the police who came to quell the riot. Later, the protesters burned 3 schools which were seen as apartheid institutions. Situated near the main Otman Road, the community protested, barricaded the road, and pelted passing cars with stones. The protests in Sobantu village shattered the long-held fallacy that it was a model location of blacks who could not rise up against Bantu administration. As in other places in Natal, where communities protested violently, it was clear the people of Sobantu village would not stand the discriminatory treatment from the apartheid government. Women's resistance in the countryside, Ikobo. The women's protest spread from Durban to rural villages across Natal. A 26 June 1959 Freedom Day rally organized by the Congress Alliance at Curriesfontein may have helped connect women. But there were also ANC activists who carried Congress platforms to the rural areas. This included women such as Margaret Mngadi and Alzina Zondi, who both mobilized women in Ikobo. Women in the rural areas were concerned about the extension of passes to women, the restrictions of influx control, and low wages paid to migrant laborers. But unlike women in the city, rural women carried burdens that came with labor on white farms, the culling of cattle and forced dipping, and the redesign of the reserves in which they lived in under the system of Bantu authorities. Many women with migrant laborer husbands found themselves carrying these extra loads of agricultural labor. These regulations made it hard for African people to till the land and produce food for their families. Dr. Margaret Mngadi moved to the Ikobo district in the mid-1950s, where she ran a medical clinic and undertook house calls. She treated women and mobilized them as she practiced medicine. In 1959, Dr. Mngadi led about 500 women from 11 villages around Ikobo, including St. Faith's, Nokweja, Hlokozi, and others, to the offices of the Native Commissioner in town. They hoped to share their grievances with the commissioner, but he refused. The women agreed that they would not depart, but sat praying as the police surrounded them and arrested them. Most of the women, later called the Migrant Mqadi Battalion, were imprisoned and served time with hard labor in Pietermaritzburg. Ikapa was not the only rural district where women revolted. They did so in New Hanover, Estcourt, Camperdown, and Harding. Women and Impi Yamatende in the Harding district. While the complaints of rural women were diverse, in Harding district they centered on apartheid plans to reorganize the KwaMatri Reserve according to betterment schemes that undermined African ways of building homes and accessing agricultural and grazing lands. The people of KwaMatri remember this episode as Impi Yamatende, referring to the women's attack on tents erected by the Bantu Affairs Department as part of the agricultural planning propaganda and the resultant standoff in the town of Harding. Officials warned of the people's plan to resist, cancelled the July 1959 agricultural demonstration. But the women arrived and set alight the Bantu Affairs Department storage tent and tanks of paraffin and gasoline. Police ultimately arrested 43 women over the next several weeks. 28 women were sentenced with imprisonment in August 1959. The women were held in the small Harding Gaol to await transfer to Pietermaritzburg prison. The women's husbands pled for their release, calling upon the women's statuses as mothers. The police told the men to bring the babies to their mothers in jail. In the hours between the women's trial and the early hours of the next morning, the village of KwaMatri planned to free their wives, sisters, mothers, and daughters. As rumors circulated of their plan, the White Town's women and children convened on the hospital where they took shelter. Young men from KwaMatri set fire to fields aside of the White Town, hoping to draw the police out. Some 120 men, armed with assegais, knopberries, and shields, entered Harding in the dark of the early morning. The armed Matri men met police reinforcements poised to defend the town. Only after a tense standoff did the crowd dissipate. Militant action continued for several days as people blocked the railway line and set fire to cane plantations and fields of grass. The women were forced to do heavy labor while they served their sentences. Women in Exile, the Underground, and MK. Militant protests continued in KwaZulu-Natal into 1960 when 9 policemen were killed on 24 January after a liquor raid. Several months later, police opened fire on peaceful protesters at Sharpeville. As the state banned the liberation movements that year, women continued to contest the brutalities of apartheid underground, in exile, in the armed struggle, and from their homes, places of work, and in the streets. Women were among those mobilizing as trade unions and civic organizations rallied within the United Democratic Front in the townships of Pietermaritzburg, Durban, Mpophomeni, and beyond. They protested rent and bus fare increases and boycotted plazas. In Lamontville, women were amongst those who boycotted buses and formed the Joint Rent Action Committee to challenge rate increases. There, Florence Mkhize organized to address housing and education crises. In another example, Joyce Shabalala, Audrey Mkhize, and Rebecca Nxumalo were amongst those arrested in 1982 protests in Sobantu against escalating costs. During and after these protests, Sobantu youth, including women such as Maniza Kaba, Nompumelele, and Nonkonzo Makubane, began to leave the country to train. Others worked underground in the country, and operatives recruited women such as Greta and Janetta Applegreen into these ANC networks, where they did reconnaissance and transport, amongst other responsibilities. Women nurses helped facilitate the rescue plan of Gordon Webster from Edendale Hospital. Dorothy Nyembe carried out underground activities in the province. While many young women joined the struggle through youth and civic organizations and trade unions, older generations promoted political and gender issues through the banner of the Natal Organization of Women, NOW. NOW was the multiracial women's organization formed in 1983 to improve the living and working conditions of women. It served as the main progressive women's association in Natal, taking up the program of the UDF. They provided support for families of political prisoners and those killed, organized funerals for fallen activists, and provided protection to cadres. The Black Sash formed in 1955 as a liberal white women's resistance organization. These women stood silently in Durban and Pietermaritzburg streets throughout the 1980s with placards denouncing apartheid policies and actions. They monitored and documented oppression while their advice officers helped women and men navigate loopholes in apartheid law. As a state-sponsored civil war ravaged the region in the 1980s and the early 1990s, women experienced the brunt of violence, participated in it, and fought against it. They sought ways to protect their families, fed and strengthened fighters, took up arms, or promoted peace. Lawyer Victoria Mxenge defended many of those arrested in protests and was a prominent member of the UDF until security forces brutally assassinated her in 1985. Jabu Ndlovu, a prominent shop steward in the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa and a community leader in Mbali, was assassinated in 1989. Nokuthela Dube, educator, composer, and Christian leader. Born in 1873 at the Lindley Mission Station in Inanda, Nokuthela was the daughter of Simon Mdima, one of the Amakholwa leaders of the American Zulu Mission, American Board. As one of the early graduates of Inanda Seminary, the pioneering school for female leadership training in Africa, Nokuthela Mdima qualified to join its teaching faculty in the early 1890s. She married John Langalibalele Dube, her mission sweetheart, in 1894, as he took a break from America, where he completed his secondary education. As if to seal their love for each other and their mission to bring light to their people, they established in 1895 a primary school in the village of Ngwati, near Pietermaritzburg, the first black-initiated independent school in South Africa. With the support of Nokuthela's brother and John Dube's most trusted friend, John Simon Mdima, an educator turned businessman. Nokuthela was one of the first African voices to be heard in America through a school essay she wrote in 1882 titled My Home, published in the same year in the Rice County Journal in Northfield, Minnesota, the town of her Inanda teacher, Mrs. Ida Bella Wilcox. In 1896, she left for the United States with her husband, John Dube, to pursue university-level education at the Union Missionary Training Institute in Brooklyn, New York, where she specialized in music and home economics, including tailoring, while John trained for the pastorate within the Congregational Church. From 1896 to 1899, Nokuthela and John traveled around America, speaking about the need for education for their people back home. Inspired by the ideas of the famous African-American politician and educationist Booker T. Washington, the founder of the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. She used her talent as a musician, singing click songs and playing the piano and auto harp in front of mesmerized American audiences to raise funds with the goal of establishing the Ohlange Institute, their own Tuskegee of Africa, the shining symbol of Black South Africans' ability to uplift themselves and live independently in the midst of British colonial domination. Nothing translate Nokuthela's love for her people and her deep faith in their God-given power to reach any heights they desire than the message of the song Nkosi Sigelela, which she taught to Ehlanga students early on, popularizing it with permission from its like-minded composer Enoch Sontongana under the title Prayer for the Children of Ohlange, umthandazo wosapho lwaseHlange. Nkosi sizumafukuzela, masiphakame isandla sakhe, yizwa imithandazo yakhe, uyisikelele. Nkosi Mbusise okaDube nanxa eya kwabamhlophe nxa enqumelwe izandla siyamthandazela. Nokuthela built as an equal partner and everything known today as the Dube legacy, the Ohlange Institute, Ilanga Lase-Natal newspaper, and of course her husband's political struggle as the first President General of the South African Native National Congress. She was an inspiration for men and women alike, royals as well as commoners. Although she had no biological children, early generations of Ohlange students, including Chief Albert Luthuli, grew under her motherly care, learning independence and self-affirmation. Her story is the irrefutable proof that early women leaders did not just stand behind their husbands, but fought next to them in the front lines of the struggle for liberation. In 1914, after being estranged from John, Nokuthela left for East Transvaal, where she continued her philanthropic work among exploited black farm workers, until her untimely death from a kidney infection in 1917 in Sophiatown at the age of 44. She is buried at the Brixton Cemetery in a grave that was discovered in 2009 and declared a National Heritage Site. Bertha Mkhize, advocate for workers, women, and the nation. Bertha Mkhize was born in 1889 near Mkomazi. She attended the famous school for girls Inanda Seminary and the Ohlange Institute. She became a teacher and started a tailoring business in Durban. She joined the Industrial and Commercial Workers Union in the 1920s and in the 1930s participated in several campaigns against passes for women in Durban. She served on the executive of the Durban Bantu Women's Society, formed in 1930 to promote social welfare, and was a member of the Daughters of Africa. These women's welfare organizations promoted and empowering racial consciousness important to African nationalist politics at the time. She joined the ANC and participated in the Defiance campaign, for which she spent several months in prison. With Fatima Mir, she formed the Durban and District Women's League in 1952 to bring together women in the Natal Indian Congress and the ANC Women's League. They set up preschools and distributed milk in Cato Manor, where Mkhize was active in the struggle against forced removals. She became one of 4 national vice presidents of the Federation of South African Women from 1954. She was among those charged with treason in 1956. Quote, I led the woman. But when we were arrested in 1956, when we were arrested and sent to Johannesburg for the case of the treason trial, it took government a full year to see that it was not wrong. End quote. Taken from KCA V147151, Kelly Campbell Oral History Project. Nokukhanya Mabhengu Luthuli, First Lady of the ANC and social advocate for women. Nokukhanya Bhengu Luthuli was born in 1904 at the Umgeni American Board Mission Station. Her grandfather was a chief of the Ngolosi and her father one of the early Christian converts at the station. She took charge of her own education, working for the matrons at Ohlanga and Inanda to afford school fees. She attended Adams College and became a teacher, marrying Albert Luthuli in 1927. She was a community leader in Groutville, mentoring local women and establishing a branch of the Daughters of Africa. In 1957, she led a delegation of Natal ANC Women's League members to meet with Zulu King Cyprian Beguzulu regarding the extension of passes to women. As wife of the president of the ANC, she also served as his representative, a diplomat, and a preservationist of his legacy, especially during the years of Albert's banning. She attended functions when he could not, wrote letters to international supporters to publicize his conditions under banning, and ensured that his papers were carefully ferreted out of the country after his death. With funds from the Nobel Peace Prize, she ran a farm in Swaziland that funded black student scholarships via the Luthuli Memorial Foundation. In these exemplary ways, she served as First Lady of the ANC. And I quote, Albert would sometimes read his speeches to me while I was working in the garden or in the house. I would argue certain points with him, and he would alter the speech accordingly. End quote. In Rule, Etiken and Van Dijk, Nokukhanya, Mother of Light. Fatima Meer, scholar activist. Fatima Meer was born in Durban in 1928, where she grew up in a large extended family with many members in the Natal and South African Indian Congresses. She helped with the family-owned newspaper, Indian Views, studied at Durban Indian Girls High School, and earned her BA and MA at the University of Natal. In 1946, she set up a student passive resistance campaign to support the Indian passive resistance campaign and spoke at some of the rallies. After the 1949 disturbances in Durban, she worked with Bertha Mkhize to launch the Durban and District Women's League to build alliances between Africans and Indians. She was amongst those banned under the suppression of communism in 1952. She became a founding member of the Federation of South African Women. In the wake of the 1976 Soweto uprising, she was detained for 6 months alongside Winnie Mandela and 11 other members of the Black Women's Federation in the Fort Prison. She survived an assassination attempt that same year. Meer engaged with a diversity of political thought ranging from Gandhism to non-racial and Black consciousness. In 1956, she became the first Black woman to hold an academic position at a white university in South Africa. She facilitated the training and publication of Black researchers and writers, and herself wrote biographies of Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, and the Umkhonto we-Sizwe soldier, Andrew Zondo. She declined a seat in Parliament after 1994 and went on to advise the ANC government. Quote, Fatima became my friend, my sister, and my confidant. She, like me, struggled within a community to be valued as an intellectual and an activist, and more than just a housekeeper. Winnie Mandela, forward to Meer's autobiography.